Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on, for employee and host organization. And the title for this is Psychosocial Support for Researchers at Risk. And this webinar will be for 2 hours from now until 12 o'clock. If I have to present some facts of the program and the title, this initiative is to support, to promote, and integrate researchers at risk in Europe. As you know, many scholars coming from many countries are here in Europe, and this initiative, as I mentioned before, is to support, to promote, and help them integrate in Europe. The project began in September 1 in 2019 and will end in August 31 in 2020. We are almost 10 organizations in total, coordinated by scholars at risk, and is hosted at the Maynooth University in Ireland. And if you want to see what we are doing, I can just advise you to go to the website of Maynooth University South Europe Inspire project. Our objective is more the groundwork for a long-term cross-sectoral European support, contribute to inform the policy making in Europe, bridge the gap between a national and European support mechanism between academic and non-academic sectors, improve career development opportunities for researchers at risk, and prepare the work environment to host, found, or employ researchers at risk is what we are doing today. And the last sixth one is grow the diversity of actors supporting researchers at risk in Europe. If you need to get involved, just contact us at Inspire Europe at Maynooth University EA to join the mailing lists. If you want to join the upcoming webinar and view the previous webinar, just go and click at the Maynooth University South Europe Inspire Europe webinars. You will see what we did before, and you can just see what we are doing for many months now. If you want to suggest a topic for further webinars on preparing the work environment, please do not hesitate and just contact us. Just as we mentioned before, Inspire Europe, just contact us. And if you want to get a view on comprehensive list of resources for researchers at risk, just go to the website of Maynooth University South Europe and click on resources. We will have today 3 speakers. The first one is Dr. Halina Grimala-Muzinska, Professor of Psychology of Culture, Religion at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow in Poland. The second one will be Olga Hundler. She is PhD in Clinical Psychology, Fellow of the Academy of the Freie Universität in Germany. The third one will be Dr. Heike Berner, Head of International Network and Research Cooperation in an international office in Germany. Maybe I have to give you just a small about those 3. So Dr. Halina, she is a current research partner to Forced and Economic Migration. Since 1994, Dr. Grimala-Muzinska has conducted research among refugee community in different countries and in local community in the host country in which refugees reside. Dr. Olga Hundler, she is a PhD in Clinical Psychology, Fellow of the Academy in Exile of the Freie Universität in Germany. Dr. Hundler is a Fellow of the Academy in Exile at the Freie Universität in Germany, as I mentioned before. Her primary research focuses in masculinity, gender, feminist psychology, and academic freedom. Dr. Hundler is a lead educator for the massive open online course, MOOC, and she's working on the dangerous question, why academic freedom matters. And the third one is Dr. Heike Berner. She is head of International Network of Research Cooperation at the International Office, University of Cologne in Germany. Heike Berner worked at the International Office, where she heads the section on international science. She has been working with researchers at risk since 2016. Every speaker will have 10 minutes, and after the 10 minutes, there will be followed with question and answers. As we have to work together, we do also have some housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded and will be available afterwards. Chat function for attendees is disabled. Questions can be raised using the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. If you don't wish your name to be seen, please click Submit Question anonymously before sending. After webinar, there will be a short survey, which we will be grateful if you could complete. After this small introduction, I will give now the floor to Dr. Halina Grzymala-Muzinska.
Welcome, everybody. Very happy to be here. Let me start my screen. Thank you very much, Ewing, for introduction. Just for sake of certain clarity pertaining to the topic, I just made in my profile 25 plus 4, which is certainly not my age, but this is the number of years I'm busy with the topic we are going to talk about today. For over 25 years, I'm working with and for refugees, both in Poland and outside of the country. And for 4 years, I'm involved in the project pertaining to ICORN activities, which is sort of the twinning program to researchers at risk, but based and directed towards artists at risk who are getting residency in different European countries. First of all, while talking about scholars at risk, I think one needs to remember that people who are coming under this title to Europe, they are in Europe bodily, but mentally, to a very big extent, they are shifting between community back home and community, receiving community in Europe. Let me quickly, based on my research review for you, what is to be connected to community back home when you are coming to Europe. First of all, people are experiencing pretty serious helplessness about the situation in their countries because they are at the moment, they are safe, they are far away, but they feel in the same time that they are not able really change much of what's happening back home. But it goes hand in hand with the sense of responsibility. Again, by European standard, if scholars at risk are coming with their immediate family, nuclear family, it seems to settle all issue. But this is not the case in many cultures when people are members, not just nuclear family, but extended family, and sense of responsibility towards family back home creates a very demanding adaptation. And also sometimes it goes with guilt feeling which comes from the fact, okay, I'm here, I'm pretty much safe, my family, husband, wife, children are safe as well, but are many others who were very close to me and they are not safe at all. But what is also very interesting, it's something which in psychology we call it sometimes transitional space. Transitional space does not belong entirely to community back home, nor to receiving community. Let me quickly elaborate on that. What belongs to transitional space is the consideration about immediate family and their cultural belongingness. In the research I was talking about, I've met several cases when parents start to worry a lot about cultural socialization of their children. Children are embedded in the new cultural milieu, in the new language, and parents start to realize, okay, my child gets new friend, and that's fabulous. But in the same time, a language she or he is socialized at is the foreign language. We have less and less vocabulary which we can share, and that's nothing good. But that's not the only aspect of transitional space. When we are moving sometimes from very different environment, our adaptation could be considered a sort of ecological adaptation, by which I mean we need to adapt to different measure of sun, different temperature, different food, and this is which puts a toll on our bodily reactions. Bodily reactions which could be pretty disturbing, and they are just originating from being in between, in this being in transitional space and coping with challenges created by different ecology, different location in the new place. And the third thing, which also belongs to transitional space, pertains to consideration. Is there any way back? I'm here, but could I foresee in some future to be back home? That's something to ponder about. And what is also about encountering with the host community? There is a couple of different questions, difficult questions. The first in the beginning is the sense of alienation. What I don't belong. I don't belong with, I don't belong to. I might belong formally, but I'm not the team member, right? I'm a bit of alien here. And it goes with the next question. What does it mean to be a good guest? Which is the conduct of behavior I have to follow to be a good guest in this community. And I have to build new network, and then encountering this community, I have to build a trust. I have to build sense of belonging and restoring sense of agency. I think that's extremely important because unconsciously often people who are coming as refugees, they are deprived in the perception of hosting group of the sense of agency. And I think by giving, by offering, by getting opportunity to offer something to the host community, this could be somehow medicated. And then what host community could do? The first of all, believe in the need for cultural broker, someone familiar with the culture of receiving of the guest who is received, but also familiar with the culture of the host community. Then creating safety net. That's very important. Because of pandemic, we don't have to restrain ourselves only to searching for therapeutic support on campus. There are some resources which could be used out of the country, and extremely important, these resources need to be adapted to specific person. In my research with refugees, I found that sometimes this is very tricky. Someone who speaks the same language as the person who's seeking a help might otherwise come from very opposite political views. And then similarity in culture does not mean this person can be trusted, this person can actively support. And one have to remember that support, psychotherapeutic support, is a concept which does not travel across cultural border. 45-minute session, which is pretty standard in the European context, might not be the session which is possible or which is welcomed in any other cultural context. I think that's for start. Yeah, I'm happy to take the questions.
Thanks a lot, Halina, with your presentation. It was a good one. If I may have to summarize, you mentioned about shifting from the community, a bad experience, for example, when people have to leave the country and go to another country, just living in Europe, but living in a country where they're coming from. You talk about the sense of responsibility to people who are back home and this guilt of feeling. And when then you come with international space language, with the need of socialization, this also something that you find in the research. You think about the body reaction that are disturbing and thinking about back home. You also talk about alienation, need to be a good guest, the need of network and the sense of belonging. And then you said if people want something, that there is a need of culture broker and safety nets and resources of the country. This is what I tried to see in your presentation, that it was good. And I would like, if there's possible, some two questions.
I think we have some question on the Q&A.
Yeah, I see that Ragnar Sanf said you mentioned 45-minute psychological session aren't the standard in European standard. Then what are longer session?
Well, I think what I had in mind, talking in European standards in therapeutic session, is this highly standardized 45 minutes interval, which does not build trust, which does not build sufficient relationship. And again, from outside Europe, any help become possible when the really personal relations are built. Therefore, my suggestion is to be very flexible when we are seeking for this support, and don't expect these measures which are normally offered as the talking therapy, because talking therapy is a Western invention. It does not travel very well across cultural border. So we better be careful with believing we offer support when we stay with what we think. We better ask what is desired and what is looked upon.
Yeah. I see that many questions are coming, but we will have the time for questions. I see another question that people are asking about intercultural psychosocial support. This will be after this 1 hour webinar, and there will be a workshop on this matter. So we will come back to the question, and we have now to give the floor to Dr. Olga Hunler.
Thank you so much, Ewan. Let me share my screen as well. I'm so grateful that Halina took the lead, so I have much easier job to continue. So after the arrival of the at-risk researcher, there's another challenge starts, which is the lives of ongoing insecurity. There are many displaced scientists, as we all know, and very few support programs, and support programs mainly based on short-term to very short-term contracts. So transiency of the residence, precarity of the employment, not knowing where to go or what to do next make the displaced scholars' life quite challenging. And unlike many of their not at-risk peers, they have to deal with many hassles, including stress, foreignness, loneliness, bureaucracy, discrimination, as well as racism. So when I have found a chance to talk with refugee scholars, some themes emerge more often than the others. For example, it's important to remember that at-risk scholars does not share the common risk all the time. Some scholars have experienced war and conflict in their countries, but some of them experience political persecution. Some had been arrested or had been attacked either by their governments or some radical groups, but some of them did not have any of those experiences, but they might be targeted because of their academic work or their research topic. Different experiences have different consequences. So different personality characteristics, different life stories could alter people's reaction to the very same events. As a result of these differences, for some scholars, post-traumatic stress disorder or trauma symptoms might be more prevalent, but some scholars might have greater loss and grief. And the grief might be a reaction to a real loss, for example, loss of a loved one, or it could be a symbolic loss, such as losing a status, respect, or the language. Not every refugee scholar experiences psychological problems. I think it's an important thing to keep in mind, but many of them need support and encouragement to understand and integrate into new environments, such as integrating into highly competitive job markets or change of physical surrounding, different health and educational system, even different climates. Most of the time, refugee scholars or at-risk scholars experience everyday racism, discrimination, and microaggressions. And people might have better resources to deal with them before, but most of the time, those tactics and coping mechanisms do not work in new country. In addition to losing political, social, and other kind of symbolic power, there is a great risk of feeling powerless and lonely. Another problem is categorization and homogenization. You are coming from X country, it means you do this, or you do that, or you hang out with this or that, erases people's individuality. In addition, this homogenization might prevent people to look for wider connections with others and make the possible support mechanisms useless for them. Coming from similar geography does not necessarily mean that they are sharing the same worldview or they are sharing the same religious beliefs, political positions, or they enjoy the same traditions. When there is a big diaspora from, let's say, country X, already residing in the host country does not necessarily mean that they will support each other. On the other hand, all migrants and newcomers might have tensions or even animosities against each other. When you first met a new displaced scholar, it is wonderful to start with a genuine welcome to show that you are on the same team. It's great to encourage the scholars and help them to lift the spirit. However, sometimes those encouraging talks or motivational speeches could be quite overwhelming. Sometimes when people share their high expectations from you, this could simply increase your anxiety or it could make you angry. This also might be a case for at-risk scholars as well. For example, pushing at-risk scholars to learn the language of the host country might not always serve the best strategy. In Germany, for example, we all know that it is very hard to navigate without a fluent German, socially and academically. However, when you keep telling scholars to learn German prematurely, or scaring them with the negative consequences of not being able to learn German, it pushes them away from support system and infantilizes and sometimes humiliates them in front of their colleagues. Many scholars look for safe spaces to establish their agencies. So helping them to create those spaces together is very precious. When people feel like they can report discrimination and mistreatment and they know that there are accessible mechanisms, they feel safer and psychologically much healthier. Instead of making assumptions about how they feel or what they need, I strongly believe that it's easier to ask people what they want, what they need, what are their priorities or what are their urgencies. And trying to provide everything in advance is an overwhelming effort. And in the long run, actually, it might make you very tired and very exhausted. On the other hand, the people you are interacting are not some fragile glasswork that you have to handle gently. Those are very resilient people who survive numerous events and experiences that an average European people only watch on TV. So it's important to trust their resiliences. Instead of pity or charity, people deserve solidarity and collegiality. Positive publicity is a great way to increase the support for the refugees. We know that when there is a media attention, public will interest and participate more in solidarity initiatives. However, sometimes those narratives just focus on the tragedies. Sometimes they might adopt an Orientalist, even colonialist tone, and undermine individual qualities and accomplishments of the scholars. So it is not very empowering strategy to support the scientists or promote their scholarly activities, just focusing on the hardship, difficulties, and vulnerabilities they had been experiencing. Showing people resources is the most valuable thing that every personnel who encounter with the refugee scientists. So you can do rather trying to everything by yourself. So most of the time, it is extremely hard to navigate in the complicated bureaucratic systems without a guide. So in order to support the scientist, you can think about, for example, preparing handouts, to-do list of emergency numbers, hospitals, psychologists, or counselors. You may think about short-time twinning or companionship programs to share your burden. Also, most of the time, people who welcome the refugee scientists at the first hand does not have a training in psychology or psychosocial services. So the best alternative to learn about psychological help services in your areas. Also, it's a good idea to check for mental health professionals who can speak other languages than the language of the host country. For example, offering apps to find a psychologist or a psychiatrist is much better alternative in many situations. Also, you can learn about community support organizations if there is any, and you can share their access information with the scholars. Another thing that I would like to address rather quickly is what to do for yourselves. Most of the time, people who work in the welcome offices or first introducing teams or welcome teams generally have a very heavy workload and burden on their shoulders. So it's important to share it with your colleagues, with your friends. It's always okay to ask for help from your colleagues. It's important to look for supervision because this field is new, it's novel, and there might not be many resources available. It's important to be mindful about your own limits, and establishing kind but firm boundaries is always for the benefit of yourself as well as the people you encounter with. It's important to understand the boundaries and the limits of your job, of your work, and your personal availabilities. And also another thing to be careful is the secondary trauma, which is very common thing to be experienced by the people who talk with, work with people who had the secondary traumas. So I am going to stop here, and hopefully I'll get questions and hopefully provide the answers. I would like to share an article here, which is a first-hand experience of the at-risk scholars. I find it quite useful myself. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Holger, with your presentation. It was a good one when you talk about the resilience. You talk about the problem language barrier, different background, different experiences, trauma, need of support and orientation. And you talk also about the everyday discrimination, homogenization of a refugee. And when we know that they need a wider connection. And the other point that you mentioned is how to talk, and you ask people to have the balanced tone when they have to talk to refugees at risk. And so I think that we will have time to questions. And I didn't see now another question come in, but I think that there is one of two questions that are coming in. Would you be able to send the name of the book you mentioned in the last slide again?
Let me just go there. It's an article. I think it's visible, right? Experiences of a refugee academic. This is very recently published.
Yeah, my life as a second-class human being.
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you too much. I think that we will have time to come back with questions, and it's time to receive, to give the floor to Dr. Heike Berner. She is head of the section on international science, and she has been working with scholars at risk since 2016. Dr. Heike Berner, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ewing. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. First of all, I'm very thankful to Helena and Olga for introducing the topic as experts. As a non-expert, my contribution will be quite different from theirs, and I will tell you a bit about the support structures for at-risk scholars at the University of Cologne in Germany, and how we try to tackle the topic at a host institution. And in order for you to see the context we are working in, I'd like to give you a few numbers. We started hosting at-risk scholars in 2016, and since then we have hosted a total of 17 scholars, plus a number of scholars we supported as guests. Those are scholars who have found no official placement yet, but live in our area as refugees. And 11 of the scholars we hosted were or are funded through the Philip Schwartz initiative from the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, which many of you might know. And I find it important to mention this as the PSI is the only initiative of those we worked with so far that provides the host institution with a lump sum per scholar to be used to actively support at-risk scholars according to the host institution support concept. And it is part of our concept I'm going to talk about today. And I do have to say that much of this concept would be very difficult to implement without the extra money that's coming from there. And the last number is that we are currently hosting 12 at-risk scholars plus guests, which means we're working with 12 scholars at the moment. And it is quite a large number, but at the same time, much of what I'm talking about today can be implemented with less scholars, for instance, if you're hosting 1 or 2 as well. So some more background information to help you understand how we started. We already had a very good welcome center with a lot of experience in hosting visiting scholars. So a lot of the administrative work is done there. So housing, visa, insurance, settling in Germany. But we also realized that at-risk scholars oftentimes need more support than regular visiting scholars, as their situations are oftentimes on many levels more complicated. When we started hosting scholars, we held a workshop, and since we had only 4 scholars at the time, we invited colleagues from the surrounding universities and the scholars they were hosting. And we asked the combined scholars how we could support them best, what they wished for, what they needed. And we did something similar again on a much larger scale a couple of years later, when we sent a questionnaire to host scholars and mentors at European universities. And that was within a secret project together with the universities Amsterdam and Thessaloniki. And the third thing you need as a background information is that we decided very early on when we started hosting scholars that we cannot provide psychological support ourselves, and that instead, if we realize that it is needed, we should refer scholars to experts. So some questions that some of you asked when you registered for the webinar were also important to us. How do we recognize the need? How do we address it? And how do we propose action? So having these 3 things at hand or in mind, we decided to start with the things the scholars mentioned in the workshop and also in the questionnaires, and that were also most doable for us. So we focused on career development and family support. Career development is quite evident, I think, but family support maybe not as much, but we realize that many scholars have to carry a heavy burden, as due to language constraints, they oftentimes are the ones who have to arrange everything for their families as well. So next to their work, and they have to juggle all family issues and all administrative issues, and oftentimes in a language that most of them have just started to learn. And it is also a difficult situation for the partners, who oftentimes don't have a career of their own, as the scholars' career is in the main focus. They have no wider family around them. They have no social life, or at least not the social life they used to have. And they have their own difficulties finding a place in their new lives. And the scholars told us that if their families are happy, it makes their life much easier too. So that was a reason why we tried to focus on that. And also for scholars who are not here with their families, they're welcome to join our family support activities anyway. And you will see that most of the things make sense for single scholars as well. So the objectives of the family support were to help families overcome language barriers and escape isolation, to connect families and foster social contact, to get to know the city, solve everyday problems, and to empower families. And to reach these objectives, we are proposing a whole bunch of activities which we update and change, and we add activities. So for instance, we offer support with language courses, schools, childcare, doctors. We are having activities to get to know the city and opportunities and initiatives in the city. We explain sports and cultural activities and how to enroll in them. We arrange tutoring for children, and we also pay for it. We support partners in jobs searches if they want to, or in pursuing hobbies. We arrange excursions and meetings for scholars and their families, and we have individual consultations and home visits. And as I said, they're for families, but also for single scholars. So in this very full slide, you can see in blue the things we offer to support the career development of scholars at risk. So language classes and tutoring in German for the scholar and the partner. We find that very important. And also academic English, if that is the language they're publishing in. Coaching, one-on-one career coaching, workshops. We do the workshops in cooperation with other universities in the area who are also hosting at-risk scholars, so we can offer a wider range on topics. And the workshops are on German academic system, alternatives to an academic career, self-positioning as a scholar, presentation skills, proposal writing, and so on. On a very large, very small scale, we can offer equipment, and we also support academic events, either events the scholars organize at University of Cologne or they want to travel to. And the orange ones I already mentioned. These are the family support activities. And what is important are the ones in the middle as well, because I think they're in between the professional development and the family support. So I think the Welcome Center is in between, the regular meetings we have in between, and the coaching and the mentoring offered by the mentors can be somewhere between the career development idea, but also be on a more personal level. And then, as I said, we have a whole list of things we could offer as to external psychological support if that is wanted. So we do believe that especially the things you see in the middle and to the right help us to get to know the scholars, to learn about them and their needs, and to help us improve in what we're doing. We also hope that it makes us aware of support they might need, and then to help them find it elsewhere. And last but not least, we also hope that this support we are offering as a small contribution and helping them to continue their work and to ease the pressure they might feel. So our approach in a nutshell is not to provide the psychological support, but to offer links to get it if it is necessary, and instead to support the scholars as much as we can professionally and personally. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Heike. For you, it's just a good presentation on how people should focus on the integration of the scholar when they are coming in university, when they're coming in the country where they were not born, in order to help them put down in order to be integrated, in order to be accepted, and this may help them sometime to reduce the pressure that they can have. If I have to say that, if they have to escape before, for example, the isolation, if they have to connect with family, if they have to get to know the cities, and when you empower families, you help them to become again human, because sometimes when you are fleeing your country, you feel that you do not have nothing anymore. And I think now is the time for questions after the three presentation. And now it would be very good if we may come to the question as before, because we have the presentation of Halina, we have the presentation of Dr. Olga, and we have the presentation of Heike. I do have some question here come before, and I do have 22 questions now. I don't think that we will have to finish all the question. Maybe we have to begin with Dr. Halina. And the first question here can be, for example, how to cope with the reality of an indefinitely continuing transitional space and not knowing if there will be a way back.
Mhm. Well, I think this important aspect needs to be raised, because attention which they create, this fear, am I ever coming back? Am I ever going to see my relatives back home, my country back home? This is a just example of the very burning issue which accumulates in the body. And what I've encountered quite often, people after some time start to suffer from heart problems, from back problems, from head problems. And when they visit doctors, doctors said, oh, in the diagnosis, I see no reason for your suffering. So this is in some aspects expression of deeply seated concerns and fears, which body takes and tries to ask for attention, and medically it cannot be really settled. And just to quote one of my respondents, refugee respondents, artist, she said, if you could offer, she refers to the institution, 1 hour of personal talk with my mentor or with my kind of organizer per day, it will seriously save me from my very severe problems. So the issue of loneliness often just the being cut off from the contacts with other with members of the host community. So this personal contact is the way of prevention, because rather than struggle with heavy case, maybe we should be concentrated on preventing them to appear.
Yeah, this is what Dr. Heike said, to escape isolation. So you bring those people together, and this can help them to prevent for these problems.
Not necessarily, because being from the same country, being even, I'm referring to my artist, research among artists, being even artists not necessarily means that people really understand each other. So I think we tend to aggregate people. You are Syrian, so you'll be most happy with other Syrians, or you are Afghani. It's the same. No, no, no. That's our assumption that this is how it is, but that's not the reality. So I think we are really walking on the very thin, crispy ice in that respect.
So Dr. Olga, you mentioned this before. Can you explain this very good?
Sure. I mean, none of the human groups are homogeneous. We all know that. I mean, you may all escape from a similar problem, but does not necessarily mean that you are experiencing the problem in the same way. So it is important to, first of all, ask people what kind of connections they are looking for, because some people are quite private. They don't want to mingle with the big groups of people. But on the other hand, some people are very social, very outgoing, and you'll see them in every occasion. They just flourish when they see other people. So it is important for scholars themselves to say that I am looking for this kind of human connections. Another thing, we have to be careful about the other social or political positioning. I mean, again, coming from the same culture does not necessarily make you like think in an identical way. Even there will be some attention or animosity or not quite alike, let's say, put it in a nicer way, between a group of researchers from the same country. So I think the most important thing is just listening what are the needs and organizing the service or support according to those mentioned needs, rather than making presumptions about, okay, this is from this country and needs this. I think it's much easier, takes less time, and also drains less energy rather than putting everything up front.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Olga. I come again to the sea because Dr. Halina mentioned it, you just mentioned it, and I heard Dr. Heike say that they have to connect families. And then we talk about countries, people coming from one country. And here, I don't want to give the name of the country, but we see that is struggling just working with them. But sometimes we mention the problem of language barrier. For all you three, you talk about this problem of language. So how is it possible for the newcomers to learn the language if they also face this sort of problem? Dr. Heike.
Well, we offer language courses to all of our scholars and also to the partners, because we think it's equally important that the partners learn the language. And of course, as Olga said, for some it goes quite quickly and others take a long time. It really depends, and we try to support them as much as we can, and we also offer private classes if necessary, or tutoring if necessary. To survive in Germany, you need to have at least a basic level of German. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And to be independent and to have an independent life, you need German. So we try to everything to support the scholars, and it's not always easy, but it is necessary. And we also try to support the scholars in academic English, as I said, because for many, there is no way that they will achieve a level of German that will allow them to publish in German, but they can publish in English. So we try to strengthen this, and then we say German is then the language of everyday life, but English might be the language they will be successful in the end. And of course, if they have other languages they can publish in, or they can work in, that's great too. So yeah, this is what we're trying.
Yes, because there was a question about the importance of the language, and I think that just talking and explaining why language is so important for newcomers, this helps universities to know why it's important to invest on the language. Academic English, because this is important because they have to publish, and in Dutch of other languages, for example, Dutch language, because they have to integrate in society.
Yes. And also, I mean, it's simple things. It's like if you have children, you have to interact with the teachers. I mean, and if you can't interact with the teachers, you can't support your children. I mean, it's simple things. It's really survival things, I think.
So I have to take another question because we now have 4 minutes. How the present pandemic affected your work, Dr. Heike? There's a question.
Yes, it affected it a lot, because a lot of our concept is on the personal contact, actually based on personal contact. So with the scholars who were already there, and with those we have already established a good contact, the difference was not that great, because we could continue our conversations via Zoom, and they knew how to approach us, and we set up regular meetings via Zoom. But of course, the scholars who newly arrive, for them it is more difficult, because they don't know each other. They don't know us personally. We don't know them personally, and it's very difficult, I find, to establish a personal contact via Zoom if you haven't met otherwise yet.
Yes. The other question might be the last one. When we talk about all that invest on the newcomers, it's also a problem of budgets. And then there's a question about the budgets. What will be the budget for the host institution to implement all these activities? Do you have an estimation?
No,
Dr. Heike, Dr. Olga, Dr. and Dr. Halina.
No, I don't have an estimation, and I think you can do it with a small budget if you have a good structure within the university, or if you work like Olga. I think Olga had some good proposals. She said, you know, you can work with lists or with the kind of brochures to refer scholars to. If you can do it with a small budget, but you can also do it with a you can you know need a lot of money for it. It really depends. And this is why I stressed the Philip Schwartz initiative in the beginning, because I'm very grateful that they offer a budget for these things, because it would have been very hard for us to come up with a lot of the things, or we would have done it on a much smaller scale without the budget. So I think there has to be some money, but small things you can do also with less money, I think. But I don't have a number.
Yes, there was another question if they will have to receive the PowerPoint or all the presentation. Olga?
No problem.
So I now have to present you the upcoming events because this is when the Inspire Stakeholder Forum will be held in April 26-27 and will take place at the annual Philip Schwartz Initiative PSI Forum. And this will consist of the workshop on host institution and researchers at risk. And if you need more information, please just go to the websites of Maynooth University, SAR Europe, click event, Inspire Europe Stakeholder Forum, Berlin, April 26-27. And there will be also the consultation process in 2021 for policy and recommendation. That's contact Inspire Europe to join the mailing list and keep up to date with projects. And there will also be another webinar to come for researchers at risk on applying for research funding, because you will not continue with the research, you will not continue with your academic career if you do not know how to get funds. And the last webinar will be only on applying for research funding.